Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all here at the start of this academic year. I hope you had a great summer. For who of you is this the first Studium Generale activity ever? I see some hands, and keep raising your hand. Who is a first-year student? No first-year students here. One in the back. Perfect. Great that, great that you found us. Also this year we hope to inspire you with all our activities to make you think, maybe try to make you laugh sometimes, and also in the spirit of lifelong learning, also employees and others who are interested are welcome to visit our program. Here in the Blauwe Zaal we organize most of our lectures, discussions, interviews, but also cultural performances. I hope you are also familiar with the Zwarte Doos, the black box, our cinema here on campus. There we show every Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday films, documentaries. And this Thursday we kick off with an outdoor movie. But you can also find us on other places here on campus, also outside campus. And you can check our website for all the upcoming activities. You can check our socials. And we just added a few new activities also. So keep checking everything. So much for the commercials. Let's move on to our topic today. Today we're going to discuss the state of independent and critical journalism and its importance as a watchdog of democracy, especially in this year with elections worldwide. And to discuss this, we have invited Dutch journalist Step Vaessen. She is a Senior International Correspondent with over 2 decades of experience in Asia and in Europe, working for news stations NOS and Al Jazeera, and focusing on political, social and environmental issues. After working in the Netherlands, in Indonesia and in Russia, she's now based in Berlin as roaming Europe correspondent for Al Jazeera. So, today, she's here to give a talk on press freedom and the fight for democracy in global election year 2024. Please give her a warm welcome, Step Vaessen.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, and also great to see so many people here in the first week at the university. And I can say you have actually chosen a great university, because if a university chooses to talk about press freedom and democracy, I think you have chosen quite an amazing place. And of course, it's also an important week, because we know that a lot of students are demonstrating, they have been protesting against the announced cuts by the Dutch government of higher education. And I was wondering who in this room has protested, a student protest? Who has participated or wants to participate in a student protest? Is there anyone here? Not that many. 0 at the moment. The question is, of course, can people imagine being in a situation where you have to take to the streets for democracy? Or even a step further, can you imagine being in a situation where you would die for democracy? And this is something that in the Netherlands, of course, is very hard to imagine. It's been a long time since people were dying in the Netherlands fighting for democracy. I think we have to go back all the way to the Second World War, when brave men and women were sacrificing their lives to fight for democracy against Nazi Germany. Since then, I think we here in the Netherlands are taking democracy a little bit for granted, as a given. It's only like once in the 4 years that we have elections that the word democracy actually comes up. But not in many other parts of the world. So this person here, Wawan, he's a student. He was a student, just like you, 20 years old. He died fighting for democracy in 1998 in Indonesia. I was there. I was covering these stories, the uprising against a dictator. Wawan grew up in a dictatorship, in an authoritarian regime. He had known no freedoms, very little freedoms in the time that he was growing up. 32 years a dictator was in place, and then a student revolt happened. And it was so successful that the President Suharto, who was ruling Indonesia for such a long time, had to step down. But the students were not satisfied, so they continued to protest. And I was there with my husband, who was my cameraman, and we were there covering this huge uprising. And there were like 150,000 students and people on the street. And then the army started shooting, and they shot Wawan, and he died right in front of his university. And this is his mother, Sumarsi. And since Wawan's death, it was her only son, she has been protesting every week at the palace in Jakarta, in front of the palace, asking for justice for the killing of her son. And this has happened now for 830 times. I saw a post on Instagram from her yesterday, and she was standing there again, in front of the palace, demanding justice. And this is a time when I arrived as a young correspondent working for Dutch TV NOS in Indonesia, and I really wanted to go to Indonesia, but my boss at the time said, why, there's nothing happening there, it's too far away from the Netherlands, nobody cares. But I managed to witness the birth of a democracy, because these uprising students, these protesting students, managed to bring change to the country. And for me, as a journalist, to witness the birth of democracy was an unbelievable experience, because I could see what freedom means when you didn't have it, when you finally get it. The ability to speak freely, because before that, people were very much afraid to speak to me. I had to often change their names or not give them any names in my reports. And then suddenly, people were brave enough to speak out. The media started reporting endlessly about everything that was happening in the country, and it was a huge change. But I also saw how vulnerable democracy was. I'll give you a little glimpse of these first years in Jakarta.
Hevig wordt er gespeculeerd dat oud-president Suharto en zijn aanhangers bij de rellen zijn betrokken, om kost wat kost te voorkomen dat de verkiezingen...
He's a despot. He has taken a lot of our riches away from us. We don't want him. We want him out. Tolak Habibie! Tolak Habibie! Tolak Habibie!
Nou, ik moet me verontschuldigen. Ik ben een uurtje te laat.
Ja,
Majulah, majulah, mana?
Toevallig houden ze elkaar in de gaten, want elk moment kan het weer opnieuw losbarsten. Deze terreurcampagne heeft zijn vruchten afgeworpen, want de voorstanders van eindelijk hebben ze ons dan zover. De internationale pers gaat weg uit Oost-Timor. Voor wat er daarna gaat
The birth of democracy, a very chaotic situation in Indonesia. A lot of people died, but they got freedom, at least a lot more than they had before. And what did that mean for the media? This man hiding there behind this wall is my late husband, Andre. So he worked with me, we worked together as a team for many years in Indonesia, covering the violence and the democracy in Indonesia. And he is hiding here behind the wall in East Timor when the occupied territory that was occupied by Indonesia was also fighting for freedom. And journalists, we are always on the front lines of democracy, because the work we do is connected, of course, is one of the basics of democracy. What we are doing is holding those in power accountable if we're doing our jobs right. We are providing checks and balances. And we, of course, have to provide the truth. And that means that you always have to be on the forefront. And for people in power, for leaders, journalists are a very uncomfortable reality. And what happens is that in a lot of countries, journalists are being killed, and it's happening increasingly. In 2023, 99 journalists were killed in the world, and there were 71 of them were only killed in Gaza, and that was a much higher number than in previous years. And since October 7, 116 journalists have been killed. So there is a lot of pressure on journalists, especially when you see that the fight for democracy has intensified. And one of the journalists that were also killed is a friend of mine. This is Sander Tounes. He's a Dutch journalist. He was a Dutch journalist. He was killed in East Timor in 1999. It's exactly this month, 25 years ago. He was 30 years old. He was working for the Financial Times at the moment when he was killed. And we were all reporting about this independence struggle, the referendum that was held in East Timor, and they successfully voted in favor of independence. But the Indonesian military didn't want to give up East Timor, so they decided to start a campaign of murder and burning. And Sander was killed by an Indonesian battalion deliberately. They saw that he was a journalist, because this is his press card. He was carrying the press card at that time. So 25 years on, we're talking about democracy. It is the election year, as Gijs has already mentioned. More elections will be held this year than ever before. In more than 60 countries, elections will be held. And we know, of course, the big countries, the United States, but we had elections in the UK, in France, in the European Union, in India. A lot of elections have taken place. So does this mean that democracy is now at its highest point in history? That's the main question. Well, let's give an example here of Indonesia. So the majority of Indonesians has elected a man who has no democratic credentials. He has been a hardline general, the man on the left, Prabowo Subianto, and he's been accused of also killing and kidnapping students and activists in 1998. And next to him is the son of the current president, Joko Widodo. He's 37 years old. And why did people vote for him? It was mostly young people who voted for this couple. And one of the main reasons is that because young people, of course, were not there in 1998. They didn't witness the birth of democracy. They didn't fight for it, and they took it for granted, and they have forgotten. And the other reason is that the countries in the West who were in the 1990s very influential in countries like Indonesia have also lost their moral authority. These changes have happened, of course, because of the war in Iraq. The United States has been under a lot of pressure, but also currently what you see, what's happening in Gaza. So countries like Indonesia, but also the most of the global South, have accused the West of having double standards. So they're also not listening to messages about democracy anymore. So what we're seeing is a backsliding of democracy compared to 25 years ago. 56% of the world population, 5.7 billion people, are living now in so-called closed autocracies. That means that elections are held, but they're not free and fair. So they are manipulated in one way or the other. And only 16% of the world population has an ability to participate in free and fair elections. We have now more autocracies in the world than democracies. And this is the lowest number since 1998. So what happens is that elections are used by certain countries to keep themselves, by certain leaders, to keep themselves in power, to maintain their power, but also to get into power. We can, of course, look at Turkey, India, Hungary, And what that means for press freedom is that, of course, a lot of journalists are ending up in prison or getting killed. And this is an example in Belarus. There was an election in 2020, and the dictator, or the leader in Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, he lost officially the election because independent observers said that the opposition leader had actually won the election. But by cheating big time, he fabricated the election result. He said that he won the election with more than 70%. But the people didn't accept it. This is a country where people normally would never take to the street. They would really follow what the leader was saying. But this time, he just overplayed his power. So this is what happened.
It's an uprising on a scale nobody in Belarus predicted. Many who have lived quietly for decades in the former Soviet state under the rule of one man turned into protesters overnight. The call for Alexander Lukashenko's resignation resonates around the country. A nation awoken by disturbing images of torture and state terror. Lukashenko has ruled Belarus with an iron fist since 1994. And to an increasing number of Belarusians, he no longer symbolizes stability, but stagnation. And even worse, they say, a power-hungry leader who has contempt for his own people. 3 women are leading the opposition, among them Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, who many consider the real winner of the election on August the 9th. When security forces violently cracked down on protesters with torture, beatings and thousands of arrests, many in Belarus feared the worst. But a group of women emerged, marching in the capital wearing white, carrying flowers. That moment in Minsk was a turning point. The protest turned into a mass movement.
I'm Step Vaessen in Minsk. On this episode of Talk to Al Jazeera, we'll join 2 women to the protest. 73-year-old Nina Baginskaya, who has become an important icon for the movement, and 42-year-old Alina Pustohot, who has overcome her fear to fight for justice and a new president. We'll find out what's driving them and why women have become such an important driving force of the protest.
Yeah, when you're wondering why I suddenly popped up in Belarus, so after 22 years in Indonesia covering Southeast Asia, I moved to Moscow, of all places, a very cold country. And that's why I started also covering stories in Russia, in Belarus. So I was in Russia also in 2018, 2019, when it was still possible actually to go to the street and protest. Of course, there were many arrests at that time, but still there was a situation unimaginable at the moment. And this uprising in Belarus has completely failed. It looked like, there's going to be a change. Lukashenko was on the verge of stepping down, but then Putin came to his assistance, and then everyone was arrested. There was a real massive repression, and that meant that the whole movement went back indoors or into prison. And the same has happened also in Russia, of course. We have seen major arrests there, and the prisons are full of political opponents. And that's how repression, of course, is very effective. So the democracy has reached its peak in the 1990s, and that's when most of these dictatorships started to fall one after the other. It happened when the Soviet Union collapsed, and also the Berlin Wall, of course. We saw the collapse of that as well. But at the moment, this people power is just not effective anymore. And what is actually the reason for that? And one of the reasons that researchers have found is that our democracies are chronically ill. So the quality of the democracy is at stake here. It's not the fact that you are holding elections, but the fact that a country has officially a democratic system. It has all the elements of a democracy in place, but it's all very much symbolic because, as I said, leaders are using the system to just simply stay in power. So researchers have found that for the 6th year in a row, democracy, the quality has declined in more than half of the countries in the world. And one of the reasons also given is that there has been a growing distrust between the government and the people, especially the people towards the government, and an increasing gap between the rich and the poor, and of course also a lot of corruption. So what happened after I went to Russia and covered the uprising in Belarus? I ended up between the tulips, for some reason, in the Netherlands. Because COVID happened, I came back to the Netherlands after 25 years. And what did I find here? A completely different country, to be honest. Because when I left in the late 90s, it was an open-minded, officially very tolerant country. I was always very proud to talk about the fact that I was from the Netherlands, which was known as very open-minded and tolerant. But when I came back here in 2020, I found a very inward-looking country. People were very much, according to my feeling, sort of floating on a pink cloud, not really aware of what was going on in the outside world, and also kind of more selfish, maybe. This is like my general observation returning to the Netherlands. And it also affected my work because I was working also here as a journalist and I was covering the protest against corona measures. And even in the Netherlands, I noticed that my colleagues were kind of afraid to go to the street. My previous employer, NOS, was accused of fake news. They had their satellite vans on the street. They removed the logos on these vans, which was something unimaginable 25 years earlier. And also, they were working with bodyguards. When they were covering a protest, they suddenly had bodyguards with them. And this, for me, I mean, I came back from 25 years of covering the rise of democracies around the world. The people were willing to sacrifice their lives, and there was a lot of optimism. And then I came here, and then people were more or less afraid. So this is what I found on the streets in Rotterdam.
But for these young men, the curfew and this crisis have become an excuse to take over the city streets, like here in Rotterdam. Outnumbered, police had to witness how shops were looted and destroyed. The same happened in a dozen other towns and cities across the country. The Netherlands has had a more relaxed approach in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic compared to other countries, stressing the Dutch are too attached to their freedoms. But with infections still high and growing concern over new variants, their corona measures have now become among the strictest in the world.
What started as protests against the curfew have quickly turned violent and chaotic. They may have seen little to do with corona measures, but they might have been fed by a growing feeling of distrust against the government.
Influenced by conspiracy theories on social media, some groups have increasingly lashed out against government policies and attacked the media. Far-right politicians have been accused of fueling these sentiments.
And this is the sentiment that they have been fueling. The word fake news, the term fake news, was suddenly everywhere. So it basically came from the mouth of Donald Trump years before, and it came to the Netherlands and also to the rest of Western Europe very quickly. So whatever journalists were doing, we were accused of reporting fake news. And what did that do to the media? As far as I can see it, a lot of media here in the Netherlands, but also in Germany, I notice, and in other European countries, are now much more careful. They're very much applying self-censorship, I have to say. They're not, doing the democratic accountability things that we are supposed to do, holding your government accountable. So you can see, for example, the double standards, as has been mentioned, of reporting on the war in Ukraine, for example. It was very clear to all the media that Russia was the aggressor, because that's exactly what the government was saying as well. If you compare it to Israel's war in Gaza, not the same applies. The media are not saying Israel is particularly the aggressor, because that's exactly the government stance as well. So what the media is doing, according to me, is following too much the government's position. And my appeal has been, for the last couple of years, that we should go back to our independence. That's very important. So luckily, not everyone in the Netherlands has been accepting this position, as you can see what happened in Amsterdam.
A rally against police violence turning violent once again. Riot police forced hundreds of students from the University of Amsterdam's campus after they had occupied the main university building. Several protesters, including university staff, had to receive first aid treatment.
The Netherlands prides itself on a democratic, free country, and we've seen that our right to protest is under attack. We've been peaceful, we didn't want violence, they chose violence.
The Student Council has called on the university board to resign.
The rally, which started as a protest against police violence, is rapidly escalating, with police once again coming to the university campus. Hundreds of university staff were rallying this morning to demand the right to protest, and that's exactly what the students are doing as well.
They say they want to be able to vent their anger about the genocide happening in Gaza and show their increasing frustration with the Dutch government not doing anything to stop it.
Protesting is a fundamental right, and for genocide we are bound by international law, we are bound by a genocide convention, and the level of impunity is it cannot be explained. And this young generation, the generation of our students, they will not go along with it, and many of the staff as well.
The university board defends its decision to call police, saying protesters caused severe damage to the building. It estimates losses are as high as €1.5 million. Students vow to continue their protests until their universities have cut ties with Israeli universities. They say their number will only increase if police continue to use violence. Step Vaessen, Al Jazeera, Amsterdam.
Yeah, so where does this leave us? Because I was talking about the government cuts to higher education. That's something, of course, which is a very, according to me, serious threat to our democratic system as well. Because knowledge, of course, is also power, and very important to also hold the government accountable. On the other hand, the government also wants to cut a lot of money on the media, the national media here in the Netherlands. So we're all here in the same boat together. And I think this is all very worrying. And I think if this is happening, what we are seeing right now, our credibility as media is at stake. And if the media are failing, I think democracy is also failing. So I call on all journalists to continue to do our work properly, as it is meant to be, hold the government accountable, still report the truth, be brave, and not be intimidated into self-censorship. And I think the same goes for you students. I think you should also fight for the right to education and to knowledge, because I think at the end, although it may be a threat for some people in government, I think knowledge is a crucial part of our democracy. And what happened in Indonesia, they are also now again fighting for the right to have their democracy restored, because they feel it has been undermined in the last couple of years. But if you have democracy, I think it's very difficult for people to give it up. And these young people understand it. And last week, they all took to the streets in Jakarta to fight for it, because it's a vulnerable thing that needs to be nurtured with care. Thank you very much.